Hello there, Trades here again. Unfortunately it's really wintry outside, so we can't do any shooting right now, but I'm going to work on this M1 trigger housing, which essentially is the same as an M1A. So if you have an M1A, this really will apply. We're going to take it apart, show you how to take it apart in case you've got a component you need to change, or if you just want to clean it or lube it or whatever it may need to be. So let's start. First thing we got to do is take out the trigger pin. Actually, the first thing I want to do is make sure it's not cocked. That's the way it looks, cocked. You put your thumb there and catch the hammer. That's uncocked. So this pin, the trigger pin, is the first one we're going to take out. So if you flip it over, this is the back side of the pin right here. Take your finger and take some of the pressure off of that. And I like to use a non-marring tool, and you can start that pin out like that. So now that it's let go, there's the pin. When you flip it back around, put your thumb on it, squeeze between your thumb and your index finger, take the pressure off, and you're going to have to hold it because you're working the hammer spring, and you can let it go, and guess what? Out will come the trigger, and the plunger, and the spring, and the barrel, and the trigger itself. This is the trigger, there's the sear on the trigger. So we can set those aside. Next we have the hammer pin, that's this pin here. Now we'll take it out the same way, so we have to flip it over. This is the reverse side of the pin. There's no spring pressure on this, so it'll just push out like that. I'll flip it back around and pull the pin out. And with the pin out, here comes the hammer. Now the hammer's out. Okay, with the hammer out of the way, the next thing we want to do is we can take the trigger guard off. The way to do that is pull it down like that, and you want to rotate it, the bottom of it towards you, and you can get it out of the way. Actually, you know, it would have been a little bit easier had I had taken the safety out first. There's the safety, and there's a pin here or a shoulder that rides in this hole. That's what retains it against the spring. And with the safety out of the way, now you can roll this and it'll slide right out. So there's your trigger guard, and you've just stripped that trigger housing. Now probably the trickiest thing in here is this spring. And this part of the spring right here is what ejects the clip on after the last round is fired. Now that part of the spring won't be there if you have an M1A. It's missing. It's cut off back into here. So if you ever have to change that spring, this is one of those you have to get just right. But from the back side, you can slip a screwdriver in there, and you need to knock it out of this little groove that it's sitting in. And when you do, the spring will come off. Just like that. Now your spring's out. Okay, you've just disassembled an M1 Garand or an M1A trigger housing. And one of the things I wanted to show you, here is the safety. And we went through this in another video. That one M1 that I had a broken safety. And here is the broken safety. And you can see how much of it's missing. So if you ever find a part laying in your trigger group that looks like that, that's what it is. That's the tip of the safety where it breaks off right here. This is the part that locks over top of the hammer. So if you don't have a cocked trigger group and you can put the safety on, you know this part is broken off. And you need to do what I just did, take it apart and repair it. Anyway, you can lube it up. Points that rotate or ride on each other can get lubed. I don't think we need to go into that. It's pretty obvious. The pins need a little bit of lube. The barrel, spring here, make sure they're all clean. You might want to lube the trigger and the trigger pin a little bit. Now the first thing we're going to do when we put it back together is we get to fight with this little thing. This is usually the one that'll make you a little crazy. But you have to use your thumb and get it over top of that pin where it rides, and then you got to lift it back up on that shoulder. So you got to get your, in my case, my big thumb in there to hold it. And then you take a screwdriver and sort of push up, push that spring back up on its shoulder, like this. There you go. Now it's reinstalled. It's back up on its shoulder. If you can see it too well, but there's the pin that retains it, and that shoulder is right there. Keeps it in place. This part of the spring right here is for the safety, and of course this part of the spring here is for the clip. Alright, we got that done. Well, let's put it back together. Here's the trigger guard, and what we do is we roll it in like that so it's up and out of the way. And then you have the safety. We'll drop in, and remember we got to line that up with the hole. So we drop it in. It's probably a little easier if I turn it over, you'll be able to see it. You got to push down against the spring when it's in the hole. So there's the safety. Okay, next we're going to put in the hammer. The hammer drops back down in the hole, just like that. As soon as I get the trigger guard out of the way. Like so. The trigger guard will slide over it. Now we got the pin, and it'll go through everything. It'll go through the trigger guard, it'll go through the trigger housing, it'll go through the hammer, and come back out the other side. So it's back in. Okay, the other tricky spring is going to be this. And this is where you just have to get it just right. Now remember, on the barrel, there's a right way and a wrong way. You notice on the back side of the barrel it's cut away or open. You can see the spring through it. That has to be facing away from you. The reason is the geometry of this would be wrong in the trigger if you didn't have it facing away from you. Okay, spring can go in either way, and the plunger can go in either way. But here's the trick on this. This is one of those I can do it a million times, and then I can't. Okay, the trigger, you notice there's a shoulder here, and it's got to ride on top of the trigger housing. Don't put it down in the hole like that. It's got to ride on top like this. So you set the two together, and the trick here is to just apply forward pressure with your thumb, and when you do, it'll all just fall in like that. Take your pin, put it in there, and now you've got it all retained so it can't get away from you. This pin's got a shoulder on it, so when you drift it in, it'll line itself up, but you want to make sure it's pretty close. You can see it from the back side, you can see the hole, so the pin's pretty close. And to keep from having to hit it real hard, what I do is I sort of use my thumb like that and squeeze it, and you can take the pressure off, see? Then you can just take a ball peen hammer and just gently, it doesn't take a lot. When you kind of get it lined up like that, just give it a little wrap, and she'll go together. And that shoulder will center the pin, it'll line up and go all the way through. So there it is, it's reassembled. Trigger's free. The hammer goes back and it locks, that's good. Safety engages, that's good, that works. And I don't like letting them slam down here on the receiver. Generally it's not recommended, especially with later model rifles where this is milled aluminum, like on an AR, because you can break it or deform it. So it's a good idea to just have your thumb there and catch it. And we'll see how it releases, and it does. Now here's something I want to show you, since we have a close-up on how the sear works. If you had just fired the rifle like it is now, and you would still have the trigger pulled back, as the bolt went rearward, it rides on the hammer, pushes the hammer back and into the sear. As you can see, the sear, which is actually attached to the trigger, has grabbed the hammer hooks. Now when you release the trigger for your next shot, it transfers off of the sear here and this hammer hook over to here and this hook. And you can probably see it. As I let go of the trigger, it'll transfer. See, it just transferred. And we've got good contact. You want to make sure there's good contact there, because if there isn't, the hammer would just go forward and might chase the bolt back while it's going to battery, which could be very dangerous. And as you release the trigger, you'll see that that engagement increases. So now the hammer can't go forward. Now when you get ready to fire the rifle, this two-stage trigger works this way. As you squeeze on the trigger, you'll notice that we're going back to that engagement area, and just as it stops, you'll feel it. The trigger now picks up that 4, 5, or 6 pound trigger pull. That's because the back of the hammer here is pushing against the sear, which is spring-loaded because of the hammer spring. And that's the 5 or 6 pound trigger pull that you feel. And if I keep going, you'll watch the trigger will let go of the hammer right there, and that's when it fires. And that's how the trigger works. It's quite a little piece of engineering, really, considering you can take it apart with really nothing. You could actually do it with most of this with a bullet tip, and you can actually get this pin back in just by manipulating it and pushing on it. So there's the gouge on how to take apart an M1 or an M1A trigger group, and you can lube it, repair it, do whatever necessary. Anyway, I hope that helps, because if you're like me, you run into these kind of rifles that you can pick up inexpensively, and it's usually a repair like this that'll make them work good again. So there we are. That's the gouge on the trigger group. And I want to thanks for watching. See you next time.